Well, thank you for having me here. I'm delighted to be at Stanford, and honestly, I'm a little bit intimidated. I've never been here before, and as I think of all of the surgical training programs in the country, there are 358 or 9, depending if that last one that just lost its accreditation gets it back again or not. You are in the sort of most privileged of all positions, with the administrative commitment, with the educational leadership, with the research that you do here. And so some of what I'm going to say may sound like, well, obviously, but it's a big country. It's a big country, and there's a lot of diversity in the training programs. And one thing about being on the board is we invite people to come and give oral exams. They often are from this echelon of training centers. And then they examine people from some of those other 358 programs in the country and realize that we've got really a pretty heterogeneous mix. And so the more that we can do to put structure around training, to change it from the, follow me around and maybe you'll learn something that we had for such a long time, the more value we can bring and the more we can really uphold our duty to protect the public. So the talk today is about surgical education, but it's also about change, because when you try to implement anything, when you try to improve anything, one of the things you have to do is manage change. And without that, the best idea in the world is not going to flourish. So we're going to talk about EPAs, the why, and where we are, and where we hope to go. And I know that I'm not going to give you the basics at all. So if anybody needs a basics lesson, you have to talk to me afterwards. I have some backup slides we can go over, but I think you all know the basics. But we're also going to talk about how we got here and the tools that it takes to make a change of that magnitude. So I have no disclosures. And I'm going to start by talking about really the extraordinary leadership that you have in this room and at Stanford. We commonly get visitors at the board, surgeons from other countries who want to understand our process, because a lot of countries don't have this kind of end game of individual attestation that you have learned what you need to do to go out and take care of patients independently. Even countries that you might think would, like our peer countries, like the Netherlands. Mostly it's just Royal College countries, English-speaking countries, Australia, South Africa, Canada, Scotland, England, of course. But most countries don't have a system like we have of progressive assessment, progressive autonomy, progressive accountability. And so we get visitors from all over the country, and they ask us, how is the system set up? Where do you get all those questions? Who writes the questions? Who gives the exams? And we say, surgeon volunteers. And they're like, volunteers? How do you get them to volunteer? And the fact is we always have a lot more people who want to do the work than we have the ability to accommodate. We have about 1,000 volunteers at any given time, and usually 10 people petition for any given opportunity. And so I tell them that, and they're like, we can't duplicate that. Can we just buy your questions? That's usually the next question. But we have an incredible culture of volunteer service, of research endeavors, and of working towards the greater good. So I just want to call out the people. You already know that Mary Han, your chair, was a past chair of the American Board of Surgery. It was a fantastic year I hope for both of us, but certainly for me. David Spain was a director of the board and an ABS counselor. The council is sort of the think tank, the boots on the ground working group. Carla Pugh, also an ABS counselor. We have people who have been focusing specifically on EPAs. We have people who write exam questions or give exams. And we have directors of the vascular surgery board specifically. And if I've missed anybody, I apologize. This is the list that we culled from the office work. So that's 14 people in your faculty who are devoting time and energy and professionalism to really improving the training, enhancing the profession. So I like to, I have a lot of quotes that kind of spin around in my mind, people that said things that I thought were important that I use as anchor points, and they're, the nickname for that is aphorisms. So I'm going to frame this in some aphorisms. This is Frank Lewis, who's my predecessor, who's the executive director of the American Board of Surgery for 15 years. And he liked to say that surgeons excel at making impactful decisions on limited information in a fluid environment. And I think that is a fairly common characteristic in our field and is very helpful in change management. One of my superpowers is that I'm really good at identifying expert consultants who know things that I don't know. And quite commonly, we'll get a consultant for a strategic plan or something, and they'll say, oh, this is going to take 2 years. I'll be like, actually, it's only going to take 6 months. And they're like, no, that's not possible. There's a lot of time spent talking and thinking. I see her sneaking up on me. She told me she's going to need to do something if that happened. Oh, you're getting rid of my little marker there. Thanks. right in the middle of Frank's nose. So I think that holding that in mind, it's really important to remember about surgeons, and that makes us really good at change, right? Because we sort of assume that things are going to change, and we are able to manage change, and we're able to manage, the basic idea that we're able to manage the patient's changing condition. Uh-oh, now my forward thing doesn't work. All right. And so, change is always with us. It's, when people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this keeps happening. I can't believe that things keep moving. Just get used to the fact that for everything in your life, things are just going to change. Just when you think you've got them settled, just when you think that they are the way that you want them to do, they're going to change. And this album is 50 years old. It's a great album if you haven't listened to it. And we're in a period of really acute and traumatic change right now with the socioeconomic instability all around the world, with the national mood, quiet quitting, inflation, war everywhere. So we're in a huge period of change and an elevated period of anger and fear. So that makes the change management even more interesting and even more delicate. So I'm going to talk about changes related to surgical education, back to the EPAs, and I'll just take a moment to talk about the different lever arms that you can use in surgical education in this country. In our common peer group, the Royal College, everything is under one house. So one group of people make the same decisions, which is very attractive to me sometimes, as long as I was at the top of the house. But this is a peculiarly American way of doing things, right? It's like our government with the judicial, legislative branches. So three-legged stool. The specialty societies, I put the American College of Surgeons as the stand-in. There are literally hundreds of specialty societies. Some of them focus on education. Some of them focus on disease schools. And their job is really education once you finish your training, the ongoing education for the remaining 35 years of your life of acting as a surgeon, and also advocacy. So the college has got an office in Washington. They advocate for the patients, for access to care, for payment, for recognition. The Residency Review Committee, often confused with us, they oversee programs. They make sure that your program has got the tools and assets that it needs to train surgeons to be able to become board certified. That's actually their purpose. And that means, do you have a diverse enough patient population? Do you have a diverse enough faculty? Do you have somewhere safe to sleep at night? How is the program? In theory, they don't know your names. So you submit those case logs to them. You don't submit them to us, little known fact. We actually don't look at your case logs. Well, we do because we're nosy, but we don't need them. We only need the total number. The RSC is interested in the case logs because that's the evidence that you have a diverse enough patient population to adequately train surgeons. So they deal with programs. Theoretically, they don't even know your name. Then there's the state medical boards that people confuse with us. They have nothing to do with specialties. So it's really just that you are, in fact, a doctor. And in rare situations, people practice without actually entering a specialty. And then there's the American Board of Surgery. Very fond of this initial picture of the founding fathers. I love the homogeneity of the picture in general, the black suit. Oh, there's one guy in a gray suit who's a renegade. And the mission then was to protect the public and improve the specialty. And to a great extent, every mission statement we've had since then has been a variation on that. To protect the public, enhance the profession. That's the work that we do. There are 24 boards altogether. There's a board of pediatrics, a board of radiology, a board of internal medicine. I did not know these things until I started working at the board. You may be more aware than I am. And we've got about 45,000 diplomates altogether, people who are board certified in one field or another. And what do we do all day? We concern ourselves really with two things. One is resident training standards. What does it take to learn how to become a surgeon in any of the 5 houses that we oversee? Complex general surgical oncology, pediatric surgery, vascular surgery, surgical critical care, and general surgery. And then what about the rest of your life as a surgeon? What does it mean to stand up and say, I'm a board certified surgeon when you're 55 years old? Does it mean something? We hope so. So we're going to talk now about the resident part of that. We'll focus on that for the rest of the conversation. So we've lived in a fixed time system since Halstead, although actually his system was somewhat variable. It was 4 to 6 years and even occasionally longer till he said that you were done. But it was a time-based system. It wasn't really a skills-based system. His version of done was, I think that you're like this or you're not. And that was our version of done for a very, very long time. And I have to say, it actually worked pretty well if you look at the output. If you look at the surgeons that we trained, we really go toe-to-toe with surgeons in the rest of the world, or even a toe up. So it worked pretty well, but clearly we can do better. So we wanted to shift to making sure that we had the same outcome. So variable time gives you the same outcome. Fixed time gives you a variable outcome. People have different skills at the end of 5 years. We all know, even within our own residency programs, and certainly across that 350 some residency programs. And so how do you go about saying this thing that we've been doing all our lives that we think is integral, that involves the workforce, that involves the education, that involves the timing of fellowships, the finishing of medical school, how you take care of patients, how do you take that monster and shift it even just a little bit? And you've got, all of the practicing surgeons, myself included, saying, I don't know, I kind of followed someone around, had a curriculum that got increasingly well-defined over the years, and it worked out okay. But, a partial list just thrown down here by one of my staff of all the things that happened a little bit at a time and started having increasing impact, so that the beast of training now has nothing to do with the beast of training 15 years ago, not to mention 100 years ago. And a lot of it has to do with the feedback, with the understanding of what people are doing and how they're being told what they're doing. And so we use vague terms. You need to do much more of that versus you need to do this many times. You need to do this in this specific way. So you're learning specific language. In the field of behavior, it's common for you probably hear this if you have kids or if you're standing near a school ground, you'll hear someone be like, be good, be a good kid, behave better. They have, let me alert you, if you don't have children yet, they have no idea what that means. You have to actually say, don't push, stand in line, give them specific instructions. So it's the same sort of thing. And then the idea that just sort of standing there looking at things would actually help you to learn things turns out to be true for some people and not for everybody. And the last thing, and to me, perhaps the most important, is the secret expectations that we held for all this time, that many people could intuit and sort of understood that was what needed to be done, but other people cannot. So part of the benefit of standards is that everybody has access to the same, of written standards, spoken standards, everybody has access to the same information. So there's often one or two people in a residency program who are not quite marching in step, falling off the curve a little bit. The attendings might talk about them a little bit behind their backs. The residents talk about them a little bit. They don't get allowed to do the cases as much. They're not included in the conversations as much, and they never really understand why. Right? They never really quite get it. And so that's not fair, and that's not right. So making the expectations very clear. Here are my expectations. Here's where you're meeting my expectations. Here's where you're not. That is the key, I think, to learning more quickly, to taking, I think, less time, ultimately, than the time that we have committed to training. But certainly to making sure that we have the same product at the same time. Last slide on EPAs for this second. This is the overall timeline. We had an education session. We had a delegation actually go to the Netherlands, where EPAs were born in 2015. And we had a big retreat. We decided to try a pilot, which you were part of. There were 5 EPAs for that at 28 sites. It was a feasibility pilot. Is this possible? Can we get people to do it? That was it, feasibility. Can we get people to do it? And the answer was yes. So the board voted in 2020 to proceed with implementing EPAs across the country. We launched for general surgery in 2023. We were going to launch for vascular surgery first in July, and then we moved it to December. But the good thing about coming behind the original launch is we learned from experience, and we realized that we need a more robust, enduring, flexible technology than what we have right now. So we've sort of hit pause while we do a better job of developing the next phase of the technology. But all the other specialties will come along in the next year or so, probably mostly next July. And in 2028, we'll have a resident class that EPAs are part of their application profile. So the second aphorism, back to change. If you know better, you should do better. I was on a jury. All the times I went and was asked to be on a jury and was sent out of the room as soon as they discovered that I was a surgeon at the voir dire. They actually kept me on the jury, somewhat to my surprise. And it was someone who was a felon, had served his time, but was carrying a gun. And the question all boiled down to, did he know whether he should have a gun or not? And the DA used a very folksy, like my grandmother used to tell me, if you know better, you should do better. And that was the theme. He was actually ultimately convicted because he did know better, and he should have done better. And we know better than what we've been doing too, right? We've just been too busy to try to fix it. So if you know better, you should do better. So how do you go about doing better? If you haven't seen this movie, I think it's still available on Netflix. It is fantastic. It is the story of Al Capone, the murdering, thieving criminal that nobody could actually kind of catch and no one could actually bring down. The other gangs couldn't bring him down. The FBI couldn't bring him down. Local law enforcement couldn't bring him down. But he got brought down on evasion of taxes. So boring, so mundane. An accountant And the movie is incredible. But a lot of it does rely on the details. So when you have an idea towards change, and at dinner last night we were talking about educational change and all the research that you're doing here, to make any of that happen, there's actually a pretty long runway. And part of it starts with just a conversation, right? You float your idea. I call that phase throwing gum at the wall to see if it sticks. Just sort of throw it and see if it sticks. So we had the idea 7 or 8 years ago that it didn't make sense for fellowships to start on July 1st. If residencies were ending June 30th, totally unfair, unreasonable, probably not actually even happening, that people were working till June 30th and then moving across the country or even staying in their own institution and starting a fellowship on July 1st. We're like, this isn't right. So that's one of my things. When things are not plausible, when we're saying one thing and doing another, or we're saying one thing and doing that thing and it's terrible, those are the things that I really want to change. So I hated that. I wanted to change, to move our residents, to move the fellowships to start August 1st. And so the first time I brought it up, there was a riot. People were like, that's impossible. We can't do it. We have to have same-time onboarding. The residents won't have a salary. What will they do about health insurance? It's impossible. Cannot happen. To which I said, okay, and just step back. So that was the first gum at the wall that did not stick, but I didn't expect it to stick. The thing is, orthopedic surgery has been doing it for 20 years. They've been doing it forever. So I had that in my back pocket. So it helps to have right on your side. And then the second time I brought it up, about a year later, same reactions. Like, you talked about that before, and it's a terrible idea and completely undoable. I was like, but orthopedic surgery has been doing it for about 20 years, so maybe we should just look into how they do it. And then the third time, and when I say I mean we. This wasn't just me having a conversation. It was a group of us who were convinced that it was the best way to go. And then the third time, people were really ready to listen. The third time, they were like, yeah, you've mentioned that before. What is it that you're actually talking about? What is it that you're actually picturing? So it starts with a conversation. And then the next step is kind of getting the people that you need on your side and into the room. So I mentioned that we have 1,000 volunteers. Sometimes it's as much as 1,200 doing various things all across the spectrum of activities of board certification, helping us make sure that the exams are fair, writing the exams, giving the exams, doing strategic thinking, meeting with our stakeholders, meeting with the other societies, interfacing with the RC, the college, all of our other partners. So it's a lot of people who have a lot of other things that they could be doing with their time. They could be operating on patients, they could be teaching residents, they could be hanging out with their families, they could be meditating, climbing Mount Everest, hiking the Camino, they could be doing other things, choosing to do other things. So we must take the best possible use of their time, the best possible use of their time. And the might of the people who come to do that work, the might of the people in this room is incredible if you can just sort of harness that and be effective. At dinner last night, someone was talking about a society that they are a member of that's been meeting on the same topic for many years. Really good people at the meeting, having really interesting conversations and good ideas, and nothing ever happens. They keep having the same meeting over and over and over again because they haven't really structured it to take the next steps. So I'm going to talk about a little bit like an accountant right now, because I think this is important. If you're in the business of change management, which surgical education and improving it is, it's important to understand a little bit of how to get it done. So who are those volunteers? Who are the people at the table? Who is going to help you make the change? And so I'll start by saying that the idea of, well, if we're going to make change in surgical education, then we need all the program directors at the table. You do need program directors, but if you only have program directors, then you're only hearing one perspective, you're only hearing one voice. And so at the ABS, we used to have the societies could all basically nominate people, and every society had the right to have one person on the board. They would send us 3 names, we would pick one. There were about 40 people ultimately sat at the table. And in the discussion about which one we were going to pick, we had a discussion one day, a standard discussion, big closed, secret meeting, no notes, nobody says anything outside the room. And there was down to 2 candidates, and they said, well, this one has 250 publications, and this one only has 25. So we have to go with the one who has 250 publications. And then the conversation came around to, how many people, if you have 40 people, do all of them have to have 250 publications? Does that serve us well? Because that is how we had acted. That, the academic productivity, that being the biggest surgeon, that doing the biggest cases, that being able to, fix the aorta, take out the pancreas, resect the esophagus, that those skills were the most important thing. the things that should be honored, and didn't actually think about, well, is that really what we need? Do we need only that voice? Maybe we do need someone who wrote 25. Maybe we need someone who never wrote a paper ever. Maybe we need a couple people who don't actually operate with residents, which is most of the surgeons in the country. Maybe we need a couple people who are fresh out of training. Maybe we need people who are doing locum tenens. Maybe we need a whole bunch of different voices. So you figure out, like, what is it that I need to get this project forward? Who understands? What are the skills that we need? And look for those people. Don't look by title. Look by what we call competencies. And then you're going to have to forgive me, but I think that this is critically important. Once you have those people, you've got to make the discussions work. You have to start off with a point. You have to make sure that everything starts on time so that people always know it's going to start on time, so that they always come to the meeting on time, and they know it's not going to finish before it's over. And we always start by reading the mission statement at the American Board of Surgery so that everybody remembers what it is we're here for. What is the purpose of the meeting? Start the meeting with, what is the purpose? What are we all here to do? That sets the tone. And then do simple things that load level. So if you're not going to use the honorifics, if you're not going to say, we're going to ask all the chairs of the Department of Surgery to come to a meeting, then you're going to have people who have different sort of social standing and different familiarity with the group. So if you start a meeting off by just letting it free form, some people are going to be called by their first name, some are going to be called doctor, some will be called sir, some will be called queen. So you want to make sure that everybody's called by the same title so they have the same standing, which allows them to have the same kind of impact or value in the meeting. Set the rules for how people talk so you don't have people over talking. Everybody has to raise their hand, they'll get called on. Everybody has to turn their card sideways, they'll get called on. Make sure that everybody in the room has the opportunity to say something. We expect inclusive language, and we actually will educate people or offer corrections if they use older school terms. We have rules like don't let anybody dominate the conversation. You can only make a point once in a discussion until everybody else has had a chance to speak, and then agree about whether everyone can tweet out everything that happened in the meeting or not. So it's really important to make sure that the meetings are productive, that you take these valuable people, that you pick the right people with the right skills to move things forward, and then you give it a chance to actually get the work done in in manageable pockets. And so I said we always start off with the mission statement, so I'm going to actually pause that our the short version is protect the public and enhance the profession, but the mission statement of the American Board of Surgery might surprise you: serve patients, society, and the specialty of surgery by providing leadership in surgical education and practice, and ensures excellence through building a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture through rigorous evaluation and assessment, and by promoting the highest standards for professionalism, lifelong learning, and the continuous certification of surgeons in practice. So the first thing is the patients. The first thing is serving the patients. It's not about the surgeons. It is about the surgeons, but the first thing is about serving the patients. And one thing about a nonprofit that I didn't know until I ran a nonprofit is legally you're only allowed to do work that's covered by your mission statement. So when we decided that we wanted to work more on inclusiveness, we changed our mission statement because you can only do 10% of your work outside of your mission statement. Just a little fun fact. So the third aphorism, this is Singapore General Hospital. Singapore used to use the Royal College of Surgeons system for training residents, which is very much of a see one, do one, teach one. Follow me around and you'll learn something. And then they have the exams all during their training. You don't finish your training until you've passed all of your exams. But there wasn't a structure, there wasn't a curriculum. They decided that they wanted to change their practices and switch over to the American way of training, which is interesting. And then Singapore, of course, is an autocracy. So once that was decided, so it was going to be. So they invited the American Board of Medical Specialties, that group of 24-member boards, to come and teach them, and I was the surgical point person. And I met the Minister of Health, and he said how pleased he was, how excited he was to get that job before this initiative was decided. He just felt like he was at the pinnacle of his profession and kind of sitting back to enjoy the accolades. And one of his colleagues said, how can you just take that title and sit on top of this whole thing when you know it doesn't work? So with power comes responsibility. So when you have these positions, you have to actually fix the things that you know are not working. So when I took this job, I had some really great aspirations. I really wanted to change resident training or impact resident training in a way that recognized where I started that change is inevitable, that things will always happen, that in those years of your life from 25 to 35 or 27 to 37 or even longer, you will have both joys and tragedies strike you that will get in the way of showing up for work, that's predictable, and that any system that doesn't allow for that is bound to fail. So starting to tweak around the edges to work a little bit to make it possible to take longer leave, to come in and out of surgery, to do other things that you might be interested in. That was one of my goals. And the other was to make, and one of the other ones was to make that additional 35 years also meaningful. Representative of what kind of practice you have, valuable, notably valuable to the public, so that we could genuinely point in a board-certified surgeon and say that person can be trusted to know what the best practices are and to practice by them. So those were sort of, my daydream, like the Minister of Health, kind of sitting back and doing the cool things. And then almost the first thing I found out was that the board was in actually pretty significant financial trouble. And at my final interview, when they asked the great question of like, what are your weaknesses, which you should always be prepared for, I said, I've run departments, I sat in the C-suite in a hospital, but I would need help with the granular detail of running a business, even though I could do big cases, I'm not a business person. I had to learn how to become a CEO. So that was one of the last things I said. And then this was the first problem that I encountered, which I always thought was really rude. But one of my superpowers is I'm really good at finding experts who know things that I don't know. I said that before, and it's like just worth remembering. And I actually called a friend of a friend who had graduated from Wharton and had become fabulously wealthy as a result of that by working as a Wall Street raider. And Wharton is in Philadelphia. We were still in-person office at the time, and I thought, well, maybe there'll be someone who's retired or someone who's working part-time who can just come and like tell me what to do to get us out of this problem. And we ended up with just this sort of brutally cold financial look at what was going on in the organization. It wasn't that hard to fix. It's just that surgeons had been in charge, right? People who'd written 250 articles and were, chiefs and chairs who didn't actually know the nitty-gritty of how to make an organization run. But he did. Everybody was afraid of him, and he just kind of slashed and burned everything that wasn't on path with the mission. Slashed and burned a lot of benefits, slashed and burned a lot of the comforts that made the volunteers have fun. But I will say that because the board stands for such high standards, we didn't lose a single volunteer that I know of for that reason, even though they didn't get to fly first class when they gave oral exams anymore. We didn't lose anyone from the office, even though we shut down their pension. So that is something to be said if you're trying to make change, to kind of know what your true north is, where you're going, and make sure that the people around you know it as well. They're much more likely to stick with you. I just saw Hamilton for the 4th time. 4 is too many, 3 was probably too many, but we like to take people. So that is, why do you assume you're the smartest in the room? What makes you think that you can solve the problems? Find the people who really actually know the answers. Sometimes I hum this to myself in a kind of snarky manner when someone's taken over the meeting and is talking too much. But at a higher, on my better days, just knowing that there's a lot of people out there who have a very different experience. Once you start being an administrator, or maybe even before that, you start to have these weird opportunities at professional advancement or self-improvement. People will send you off to take a 2-week class in leadership or a weekend class in finance, or they'll just have, actually we have, for my staff, we teach CPR, we teach Stop the Bleed, even though none of them are medical. And actually, we're going to teach a course on giving Narcan because we have Kensington in our town. And I'm just going to digress very briefly. We had the CPR course almost 2 years ago now, and my chief of staff's husband dropped dead in the driveway 2 weeks later, and she did CPR. He had a complete arrest, and she did CPR and saved his life. She didn't know how to do it before then, so that was kind of cool. But anyway, take advantage of all those professional advancement opportunities. And for me, I was at an ABMS meeting, and they were trying to do a trust exercise, one of those like fall backwards into people's arms. I was definitely in an eye-rolling mode, but at some point they said, make a list of 10 people in your professional life that you know for sure has your best interest at heart, has your back, not competing with you, not serving their own interests. And I literally sat there, I couldn't think of anybody. I could not think of one person that I was sure of. Which sounds a little pathetic, but I suspect that that's actually pretty common. After several minutes, I came up with one. So I was like, you know what, I need that. I have to have that. So I started looking around and identifying people, and I would actually ask them. I was like, I'm trying to kind of create a group of people that I can spitball with, that I can turn to when I'm having challenges that I don't know how to face, whether they're in their wheelhouse or not. And that has been incredibly helpful and effective. So 10 seems like a lot. I'm not sure I ever got there. But if you can come up with 5, whether personal or professional, that's a really, really incredibly good start. So, keeping your eye on what you're really trying to get done, getting smart people around you that you can trust, really even identifying them, telling them, like, you're my cabinet, you're my kitchen cabinet. So after almost 3 years. We had the board in very good shape. We recovered from our finance. We were on track to make some of the changes that I was interested in making, both for residency and for continuous certification. And then COVID hit, the great disruptor so far of the century. I assume many more to come. We were a fully in-house, we were a fully in-person office. And a lot of our exams required for people to be in person. And the exams, of course, our only income is the exams. So any shutdown of the exams meant the end of us. Any closure of the exams meant that people's lives, their professional careers were sort of on hold. And like for everybody else, it was a very slow reveal. Like the city of Philadelphia closed down. They said they were closed for 2 weeks. I had everybody come in the office and get their stuff. Somebody left a tangerine that we found a year later. But we didn't really, it took us a while to understand that this was long, that this was really, really real, and that we had no precedent and no idea what to do for it and no understanding of what all the impact was going to be. And so I'm very fond of using principles. Like when you just have no idea, say, well, where is it that I'm trying to go? Don't worry about how am I going to try to get there. Where is it that I'm trying to go? And so this is just an example. We're not going to go through it all, but these are the principles that we structured the council of the board, that Drs. Spain and Pugh both served on. What is the purpose of that group? What is the work that they do? What are the rules around it? So that we serve the ABS, that it focuses on the constituents, the public and surgeons, that the council is not representative. So if you're a vascular surgeon on the council, you're talking about the wide house of surgery. If you're an endocrine surgeon, you're talking about the wide house of surgery, not your specialty. You're bringing the perspective of your specialty, but you're not defending your specialty. That we need a diverse membership. That's actually a really incredibly valuable tool to continue to grow the organization. And then a few other sort of more detailed, and that we're self-selecting, that no one's appointed, that there's no one who's there because they're the chair of the education committee for a certain society or anything like that. So that's just sort of an example of principles. And I think of principles, I was a springboard diver in my teen years. And the thing about springboard diving is that a lot of it is about the diving board. So a really good diving board has just enough give and flex that if you hit it right, it'll bend down and it will throw you up in the air. And a stiffer board won't do that. And a really flexible one, you'll hit it and it'll drop you into the water. But everything's about the board. Throws you up in the air, you get the height you need, and then from the top is when you do all the twisting and the spinning and the turning. So I think of principles as like the diving board. They throw you up in the air to the place that you need to be to kind of get the perspective to do all the other things you know. So if you're confused to this day when we have a problem, we've got 3 active bad problems on the board right now. After I get over the initial panic, I'm like, okay, well, what are the principles? So what were the principles for COVID? Para-healthcare organization will do our part to protect the public and our constituents from any spread of the virus. That was like the first and most seminal thought for how we were going to deal with this change. Therefore, the follow-up thought, not a principle, but a consequence of a principle, all the meetings that we normally have in person and all of our exams would have to be virtual. Couldn't bring people to Pearson Centers anymore, couldn't bring them to Philadelphia to have their oral exams anymore. As much as possible, we wanted everybody to be able to be certified on time so they could move on with their careers, especially since 85 or even more of our trainees go on to do fellowships. So we didn't want to have a kind of log jam. Wanted to keep everybody's timelines intact. Therefore, we wanted to give both the qualifying exam on time and all of our follow-up exams, and that all of our solutions had to be equitable. You know, people came up with solutions like, well, people can go to their to their training program's chair, and they'll find a conference room for them to take an exam in. And that might have been possible for some people, but not for everybody. A lot of hospitals weren't letting any strangers in the door, and a lot of people weren't anywhere near their training programs. So any solution had to be accessible to everybody. And those were our principles. Pretty short, pretty simple. And those were the rules. And so we had a virtual qualifying exam. Anybody here take that? I'm sorry. Anybody else? I just saw one. It used to be a lot when I gave that talk. And then we switched to the virtual certifying exam. So one was a terrible failure, and we'll talk a little bit about how to deal with the failure of change. And one was really a win. You know, it saves. It's an equally valuable exam. It works just as well. It saves the candidates a ton of money because they're not flying to another city. Most people seem to like staying home in the comfort of their homes. Some people actually still move to a hotel room or somewhere so they're not disturbed. That makes sense to me. And it saves the board a lot of money too, which means we haven't raised prices for continuous certification in 8 years. We haven't raised prices for the exams. So it's been a kind of virtuous cycle all around, not to mention all the gasoline that we're not adding to the environment by flying both our examiners and the candidates all around, so an ecologic benefit as well. So the principles, even for the qualifying exam, which was at the time a catastrophe, it still was, we could sort of survive it because we had adhered to the principles. We had a good reason for the making. The technology didn't work so well. So this is my program director. He's 94 years old. He's still alive, and I am in touch with him by email twice a week. And when I go to Boston, I still visit him. We play word of the day. We pick a word. We submit the definition, and then we use it in a sentence that usually devolves to politics. So he said, see your patient twice a day when you have a complication, and call the family once a day until they ask you not to do it anymore. And it's funny, I was giving one of these grand rounds, and a pediatric surgeon approached me at the end, and he goes, you probably don't remember this, but we had this really difficult patient. He was 22 or something, but his mother was there all the time, and it was so hard to go into the room, and you told me, you know what you got to do? You got to see the patient twice a day when you got a complication and call the family every day. He goes, and I tell that to my residents. And I thought, that's so funny. He thinks I made that up. And then I thought, but Les made it up. And then I thought, oh, I bet Les didn't make it up either. I bet somebody told that to him too. So the sort of the impact that we have through generations and over time is just really interesting. So what did we do? The qualifying exam, an abysmal failure. I have a whole other talk about that, and I'll spare you the details, except for it was really awful for the people who were involved. It was also very awful for the volunteers who work on it, who put their faith in the board and their reputations there, and it was awful for my staff, who are both distraught at causing so much disruption, and also were on the receiving end of an incredible amount of vitriol. So what do you do when the change that you're trying to make fails? Publicly, visibly, horribly, with consequences for people? And you all know this feeling, right? Because you've had patients. Right? We all know this. But it's very similar to that. So the first thing is you acknowledge it and you take responsibility. That patient has a complication. I need to take them back to the operating room. You tell them. You tell everybody else around you. So we acknowledged it, took responsibility. Find those people who are going to give you good advice, talk to them, take your time to hear them. Most fixes don't have to happen instantly, other than that thing about going back to the operating room. And even that, you have time to talk to people. So seek counsel from other people. Don't think that you can hide it. And you have to just keep talking about it even when you don't want to anymore. Be present, stand up, talk to everybody who was injured, talk to everybody with new ideas, everyone who wants to call you and tell you what to do, everyone who wants to call you and yell at you, let them. Respond, make new conversations, do it over and over and over again. You can't communicate too much, and even if it's exhausting, it actually will sort of shorten the pain. In Buddhism, they have a phrase that's, if you learn to suffer well, you suffer less. And if you can really embrace the whole problem, work really hard on it from the beginning, communicate all the time, let people communicate with you, it makes the whole process go better. And then once you've done enough of that, take a little bit of pause. I'd say after about 2 weeks of round-the-clock meetings, calls, conferences, social media, webinars, focus groups, I took about a half a day off, and then I started reading books, and then I started running again. And in the end, here we are 5 years later, and it turns out that the world didn't end. So sometimes change goes very wrong, despite principles, despite the right people at the table. Sometimes change is forced to you. Sometimes you create it. So back to EPAs. Change that, I could argue that this was forced on us, right? The system that we had in place didn't reflect the fact that you don't live in the hospital anymore, that we got, tens of thousands probably of new diagnoses, treatments, and medications. We were just kind of plodding down the same path. And I could say that the change in surgical assessment and training was forced upon us, or I could say that we chose to make it. It kind of goes both ways. So what happened after we set that timeline? We got to work with the communication part of change. We made over 100 webinars, some of which won awards for the marketing company that worked with us. We created an entire new website. We educated and worked with the entire board and council, which ends up being about 50 leaders with a lot of presence and the opportunity to give talks and work with constituents. We held a big meeting that we invited all the naysayers to. We invited all of the other stakeholders who might have tried to impede change. That was a really important event. We set the tone of the meeting. We stated the purpose of the meeting. We paid for everyone to come to Philadelphia. That helped. And we made sure that everybody talked, so that in the end, everyone had said everything negative they wanted to say. Everyone had said everything positive we wanted to say. And we decided as a group, the leadership in surgery outside of the board was going to move forward and support EPAs. I think that was a really critical step. And then we started collecting data. We did the pilot, as you know. We proactively identified some of the research that we wanted to do so that we could collect the data that we were going to need to start doing them, created the beginnings of a research consortium and a pathway for all of the people who are making their careers in surgical education to apply to collaborate with the board to get the data that they need to continue their research. So what's been happening while y'all have been collecting your EPAs for the last 15 months? So what we've seen is that they're collected by almost all programs across all 5 years of residency, even though they were only required for the finishing class of 2028. So that's fantastic. Wasn't the requirement, wasn't necessarily the expectation, but it's pretty evenly distributed with a very slight preponderance for PGY 1 and 2. The faculty submit them as often or initiate them as often as the residents. That was also really valuable. There was a lot of talk that, oh, the residents will never demand it, the faculty won't do it, the residents will be in the disempowered position of trying to get an evaluation from people who aren't doing it. That hasn't happened. Intra-op, not surprisingly, is the one most commonly used. I heard that that's true here also at dinner last night, and only about 24% are the non-intra-op part, but still there, and that there's not a single aspect or phase of an EPA across the suite of 18 that hasn't been used, with the lowest one being severe pancreatitis. So really startling, incredibly successful, exciting early results. We submitted a paper to the ASA about the chief resident class, the chief residents last year who were not required to receive any EPAs. We have them from July through June. They got about 12,000 assessments, and we discovered that that progression occurred across the course of the chief year, so that by the end of the chief year, most of the chiefs, the average was entrusted or practice ready for 16 out of 18 of the EPAs, and the other 2 were rated at indirect supervision. So that was all really exciting, affirming sort of what we hoped might happen, and some of the things that we feared about our current system, how we were training people, did not end up coming to fruition. So what have we learned, or what are we learning? First of all, we're learning what residents really learn. We never really knew, right? We knew that they spent 5 years, that they did this many cases, that they passed FLS and FES, and that there was a program director's testimonial. Sometimes the program directors have only been in the job for a year or 2 or 3. But we didn't really know if people knew how to do these things when they finished their training. And I'll tell you the 2 that people didn't quite make it to practice ready as a group, and that was renal replacement therapy, which is really the dialysis catheter one, and the other one was thyroid parathyroid. And so I think there are really great locations for thyroid parathyroid, and I think the idea that everybody across the country was learning how to do those operations independently was a swing and a miss. And so that's incredibly valuable information that we never had before. We're learning that people really do progress even in the chief year, and we're also learning about the faculty, because if most of the faculty is entrusting the same resident at the same level, and someone is an outlier and maybe not trusting them or maybe over trusting them, that's something interesting about the faculty as well. And I think that surgical faculty, their training, their deployment is the next great frontier in surgical training. Letting go of the idea that just because you were once taught to be a surgeon, you can teach surgery, I think is going to be the next great frontier. So that's what we're learning in these earliest days. So, where are we going next? We have 4 board meetings a year, and usually at the end of the meeting, everyone who's not a director leaves the room, and the board just talks to me for a minute, and they usually start with, what's keeping you up at night? They always think I'm going to say EPAs, and the answer is it's never EPAs, because we are true north, because we really did get the right people in the room, because it was a change that was forced on us and that we responded to. So I think they're unrolling in just the way that I think that they should. But there are some things that are coming up behind them that do keep me up at night. So what is it going to mean for the end of your training? What are the applications going to look like in 2028 and 2029? So we know in 2028, we're basically going to use how well were you assessed, we think. This is 3 years away. We're sort of making the plane while we're flying it. But we're going to want to see that you were assessed across all 18 and across all phases. We're going to want to know the number of microassessments, and we're going to want to see the number of raters. So we're still in a period of progressive engagement. Changing the ship of surgery is very slow, because 5 years of training, which isn't really 5, it's really 7, And then, waiting to see how the outcomes are going to change or be impacted is even longer. But nevertheless, it's a long game, and we're pretty patient. So that first application, like the first year, very likely to be more about engagement. And the second one will be the proper levels of entrustment for general surgery. So what's going to happen with the rest of these things that we require, ATLS, ACLS, FES, FEC, FLS, and the case logs? Well, we don't require the case logs. We already said that. The ACGME does. But will we still require case numbers? Will we still require you to take FLS? There's an argument for yes on both those things. One is the external third-party independent assessment adds validity as opposed to it all being internal. But there's another argument that says if you were rated as practice ready across all of the EPAs that involve laparoscopy, did you really need to pass FLS? So those are decisions that we still need to talk about and think about. And of course, the program director signature. So there's sort of we launched it, and there's what's going to happen on the other side. That does keep me up at night. And one of the things that keeps me up at night is what if you finish your last trauma rotation as a 4, and you still need direct supervision, and you don't have another rotation coming? We are not in our system at all prepared to deal with that. The answer is you probably need a lot more elective time scheduled in your 4th and 5th years to start to be able to do those rotations again without it being disruptive to the rest of the residency or to you, and without it looking punitive, and without it looking like a remediation, because it's not a remediation. The whole idea behind this is that people learn at different rates. We know that. We expect that to be so, and so we're just trying to accommodate the different rates. So preparing for that class of 2028, or at least the class of 2029, to have the flexibility to do rotations as often as they need them, for as long as they need them, to get to the level that we need them at. So how to address that, what the pieces that will go into place when you kind of pull the trigger and say that they need more help, and developing plans, I think is a discussion we really haven't started. Maybe you have here, because you are pretty much in the vanguard, but nationally that has not really happened. And what's going to happen to the time and training that is so inextricably linked to the care of patients that hospitals depend on for the workforce? I cannot wait for the day when I don't have to count the number of weeks that you trained or the number of days. I do not want to ever send out another letter that says that you only trained for 47 weeks and therefore you have to work until July 7th. I may not be around for that. But we are looking right now at changing the time requirements in training. So we commonly get letters from program directors saying this person was out after their bicycle accident. We thought that they were going to be able to come back in 6 weeks, but now we're asking for an extension of training. We think they're going to need another 2 months, but we're not really sure. And the answer for us is going to be they can have as much time as you are able to give them, and they will be ready to be board eligible when they've met all their competencies. So completely unhinging the educational aspect from a time-based aspect. That is realistic, practical, and the direction that we're heading in. So already right now, last year when I got a letter from a program director saying, we think they're doing really well, and we would like you to not make them do that extra week of training. We're like, you think they're doing really well based on what? Based on that you like them? Based on the there's very much water on the floor, based on the non-specific language, based on the fact that they're your resident and you love them and you want them to not have to do extra time, or based on the fact that they met these standard metrics that we've already set in place. So last year, a simple request and saying we think they're okay, we couldn't say yes to, but going forward, the Education and Training Committee of the Council actually right now is sort of defining what that's going to look like, and I think we're going to be able to just relax the rules around leave, which I'm very excited about, and is our first kind of true commitment to the idea that competency is really the base and not time. So use the language in every conversation that you have. You can use it across the board, both in surgery and out. From what I saw you do today, I would trust you with this tomorrow. Or from what I saw you do today, call me tomorrow when you go back to do the same thing. You can use it all the time. You don't have to fill out the little app. It should be part of the standard structures of our conversation. So I said to start meetings on time and finish them on time, so we're going to finish on time. Just the aphorisms that I like, make sure you see those complications twice a day. Call your program director when they're in their 90s. How can you call yourself a leader when you know that it's broken? Or 60-something, I won't say how old I know you are. If you know better, you should do better. You're surgeons. You know that you can sort of make things move in the way that you need them to be. Step up to those opportunities, both in your professional life and in your personal life. If you know better, you should do better. Why do you assume you're the smartest in the room? There's a song to that, but I won't sing it. This one I didn't actually talk about, But in the phase where you're throwing gum at the wall and getting the people at the table, never let a no vote happen. Don't let the vote go. If you were planning on having a vote for something that needed a vote or a show of hands, don't let it happen if you're not sure that you're going to get a yes. That's something I learned from Tim Flynn, who is a chair of the ACGME and a past president or past chair of the ABS. I was literally sitting beside him for this thing he'd been working on for 3 years. We were going to vote at that meeting. We were both super excited, and he had the conversation, and then he moved on to the next topic. I was like, what happened? And he goes, I wasn't sure they were going to vote yes, because a no vote is a big obstacle, and people don't even want to talk about it anymore once that's happened. So don't let a no vote happen. Just change the topic, move on. We'll talk about this more. Know your true north, and people will stay with you. And then surgery training's long. A lot of change takes a really long time. I'm not a patient person by nature, but I've had to learn how to be one, and I think it's been really good for all of us. So all the volunteers, all the professionalism, all of you are committed to protecting the patients and enhancing the profession. I just want to say thank you.